evening and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am your host, Brenda Greene, Director of this National Black Writers Conference and Executive Director of the Center for Black Literature at Medgar Evers College. Writers on Writing comes to you every Sunday and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their lives, and their craft. And I'm very, very pleased to have with me in the studio today at Medgar Evers College, Bridgett Davis. Welcome, Bridgett.
Thank you.
Bridgett.
Bridgett, yes.
Bridgett. Very French. Very French. It's really nice to be able to talk to you.
It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to get into a conversation with you about your new novel, Into the GoSlow.
Yes.
And it was really a very good read. But before we do that, I just want to share with our listening audience some background about you, and they'll hear more as we continue. Bridgett Davis is a professor at Baruch College of the City University of New York, where she's director of the Sidney Harman Writer in Residence program. And she's also the curator for the popular monthly Brooklyn Reading Series.
Yes.
Sundays at.
Yeah.
Okay. Her debut novel, Shifting Through Neutral, was a finalist for the 2005 Hurston Wright Legacy Award. And she's also the book editor at Bold as Love magazine, a Black culture website. And her work has appeared in a number of magazines and journals, including the Washington Post, Essence, the Oprah magazine, and on theroot.com, among others. So you are very, very busy living the writing life.
Yes. Yes, I am.
Yeah. And just one of the things I was sharing with Bridgett, that she's gotten some really good comments and reviews on the book. And I just want to share with our audience what Farai Shadia wrote. Into the GoSlow spans continents and years and traces the lives of sisters linked by loss and discovery. Bridgett M Davis vividly renders the troubled, idealistic 1970s and the what's left to dream about 1980s, offering a powerful narrative driven by the all-too-human bafflement about how to resolve what could have been with what is. And
Isn't
I think
that lovely?
really captures it.
Yeah.
I mean, you just touch on so many themes among loss and identity and grief and cultural conflicts. You just put it all in that book.
Yeah, I think I have so many ideas swirling in my head that the beauty of a novel is that it can contain a lot of ideas. I think that's the distinction between nonfiction. I come out of a background in journalism, and so I care about that genre as well. But, I don't think any discipline can do it quite the way novel writing can, allow you to hold all these like disparate but equal ideas and put them in one place. So that's a joy for me.
Okay. So just following up with that, what motivated you to write this kind of novel? I mean, I kept thinking about, I said, she's much younger than me, but she knows all of this. I mean, you were really able to capture what was going on in the part of the 60s, but the 70s and 80s, you captured it so well. And
I'm probably not as young as you think. So, actually, I had a lot of things that motivated me, and the biggest one really was autobiographical.
I thought so.
Yes, because I actually did travel to Nigeria right after college, not unlike the main character, Angie, in my book. And also like the main character, I lost my oldest sister months before I traveled in my senior year of college. She died from an embolism, so she didn't die the way the big sister in the book dies. That's totally fictitious. But clearly, I understood what it meant to be at the precipice of your own life, beginning, right? Graduating from college, you're about to go out in the world, and then someone so dear to you, a sister, dies. And what does that mean about your own life? How do you handle survivor's guilt? What does that mean about who you'll become? Because so much of, I think, what defines the relationship between big sister and little sister is that the younger one really sort of defines herself against the older one.
Yes.
And when that person's gone, it's as though you're not quite sure who you are for a while.
Mhm.
So.
Right. And you also get into, that complicated relationship, but also the relationship with the mother and the sisters. And I was reminded, even I come from a family there are three of us and a mother, and we're all very different.
And they're three girls.
And they're three girls.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting, right?
Yes. I shared with my sisters. I said, I have to get this book for you.
That's great.
So you really will understand that.
Yeah.
But you really get into describing that complicated relationship. Also, was that also?
Yes, I definitely had.
Autobiographical?
I grew up with 4 sisters, so I really understood. I'm sorry, there were 4 of us,
Right.
4 girls, so I had 3 sisters. So I really understood, as the youngest one, that dynamic of sort of idolizing your sisters and resenting them. And everyone's vying for their particular place in the family
Right.
constellation, right?
Yes.
And you're all sort of having your individual relationships with your mother, but you're also trying to forge your personal relationships with one another. So there's a lot happening. And it's so different from, I think, father-daughter, brothers, brother-sister, brother-mother, son and mother. Those are all rich relationships too. But that relationship between sisters is so distinctive and unique. And honestly, I feel there's so little in the literature about sisters, particularly African American sisters.
Right. That is, and it's told, you do it in such an authentic way. As I
Thank
said,
you.
it really resonated with me. And what the mother does.
Yeah, yeah.
In terms of playing off.
Right.
Knowing
Yes.
knowing what each person needs and playing that off.
Yeah, because I'm a mother.
Yes.
Mothers understand their children really well, and they know that in a way each child is born into a different family, right?
Yes.
Because your life is different when each child comes into.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think a mother is probably on some level very aware of that. Like, what was that family when this child came into it?
Right.
And that affects how that child sort of is treated and how they function. So family dynamics are endlessly fascinating to me.
Yes. Now, part of what you do in this book is to really, as Faraya Shadea says, is span continents. You did a lot of obviously a lot of research. You document a lot of what was happening during that time period. Talk about your research process and what it was like to write this book.
It was great. It was wonderful because I had myself come of age in the 80s. I'd been in Nigeria in the 80s. So I was able to do this wonderful thing. I could both draw upon my own journal entries and things I had written back then when I was
Okay.
there. And so those impressions were still fresh. But also, I could write this book in the 21st century in the age of Google. And honestly, the research I was able to do really clarified what I had actually experienced. So it was like a validation or a deepening of what I had intuited or I had just experienced and didn't understand the complexities of. So that was great for me. I was relearning an experience I had had.
Right. That's really interesting too,
Yeah.
and it just speaks to the power of journaling and why it's important to keep that. You never know what it's going to do for you.
You never know. And some of those entries became the basis for scenes in the book that are still there today. And I am so grateful that I had the wherewithal both to write it down and then to save it.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about the historical figures like the Fela?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I'm fortunate to be able to tell you that I actually saw Fela perform at his club at Africa Shrine in Lagos.
Okay.
And also on the campus of the University of Lagos.
And that's also.
And so that comes from my own experience, but also, thank goodness, there's so much new material out there about Fela. He's in the popular consciousness now. And so the same thing happened there. I can remember my sort of clear, but also starting to be fuzzy memories of experiencing his performances. And then I could enhance that by all the research that's been done and stories that have been written that help us understand the context for who he was. And I love the idea of taking a real historical figure and planting him in the middle of fiction so that the details of his life are true, and yet I'm having him interact with characters I created.
That's right.
I love that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And also, I think the other issue that resonated for me, and I think probably resonates for many people who are Black Americans here, is, what are the experiences you have of what it's being Black in America,
Yes.
but being a Black American in Africa. Can you talk a little bit about that? I thought you did that so well.
Thank you. I really find that completely captivating, and yet again I saw so little about these relationships in literature, and it made me feel two ways. First, I thought, well, African Americans have had traditionally an allegiance with Africans.
That's right.
That has been there.
And particularly so during that period. There's so many people who were going back.
Right.
And then there's this reality.
Exactly. Because there's the time of Du Bois, and there's the time of Nkrumah, and folks in the 50s and 60s going to Ghana and other places to live from this country. We have that tradition. But then there's that tradition of the folks I try to capture in the book from the 70s. There were a lot of young Black Americans who went idealistically to help different countries nation build.
That's right.
Once the countries seemed to be flirting with democracy, right? And the idea was that maybe there were more opportunities on the continent for Black Americans than in their own country. And so people went in droves. Some of them were shocked to discover, as I did myself, just how American they were.
Yes,
and
I had the same experience.
You had the same experience,
yes,
right?
In the 70s.
Yeah, like you're like, oh, this is great. I'm going back to the motherland.
Going home.
And then you come to understand, yes, it's an emotional home. It's a psychological, spiritual home, but America's home. That's right. In the practical sense.
That's right.
Right.
That's
so.
Right. This story is also about loss, I said, and grief. And I think what's really underlying it is the search for self and the need for love.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Once again, I can tell you that it seemed to me this issue of loss in the Black community is one that, unfortunately, we all know too well. And again, seems not to have been explored as fully in literature as I felt it could be. I wanted to see more of my own experience reflected. And so I felt it was important to really explore the complexity of loss and grief and what mourning looks like and how long it takes and its permeations and the way it expresses itself in ways that aren't obvious. And so I wanted this character, Angie, to move through these real phases of grief, which take you to that moment of realizing the big issue is you have to figure out how to move on with your own life. Even though, you might feel you've got to figure out how to honor the people who've gone on, and you have to try to maybe even sort of vindicate the loss, etc. The final important step is to figure out how to move on.
How to move on, but I also saw there is Angie's need for love, not feeling loved.
Exactly.
And even in the relationships she's building.
Right.
And it seems to me that that's one of the themes that underlies so many books, that why people write.
Yes.
They're searching for answers to a question.
Right. And my sort of larger question was, who am I when the person I've defined myself against is gone?
Yes.
Right? That's like the larger question in the back of my head as I was writing the whole book. But you're right. Angie needs to figure out how to be loved.
Yes.
Because I think I'm sure my goal here was to explore this idea that you live in someone else's shadow because you don't believe in your heart that you deserve the love firsthand.
Yes. And then going back to situating this in Africa and America, the need also for a cultural rootedness
Yes.
is very prevalent, that we all need to be part of a deeper, richer culture.
Exactly. Right. And, I did not do the traditional back to Africa story. She doesn't go to Nigeria to find her roots, and yet she finds more than she was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
She finds a connectedness that she hadn't even anticipated.
Right.
And I think that that's why I wish every African American could make a trek to the continent.
Right. Because you real again, it goes back to how complicated that rootedness is, and that rootedness is not for blacks in America is not going to be the same as it is for those who are here. It's you still need that rootedness, but it's a paradox.
It is. It is. And it's no simple, it's not just a matter of figuring out who your ancestors were.
Mm-hmm.
It goes beyond that, right? It goes
Right.
much farther than that. There's a question that keeps coming up in the book. Her mother says it to her first, Angie. She says to her, there are a lot of ways to be black in the world, and you just need to find yours.
Mm-hmm.
And that's her challenge, as well as her challenge of figuring out what she wants to do and be and how she wants to move through the world. When you're African American, you got to answer that fundamental question. How am I going to move through the world as a black person?
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. So just going back to the larger question about as being a writer, a black writer, part of diaspora, what are your feelings or your views on whether writers have a social responsibility?
It seems to me that if you are writing stories that are true to the life you know and the experience that you understand, and that you are attempting to create characters that aren't necessarily positive, but are complex, that is a progressive act. I think that is itself a socially conscious move.
So just being true to what you believe in is
Being
enough.
true to being true to characters that resemble those you know in their complexity. My concern sometimes is that I see characters that are in literature or in popular culture and film that are certainly powerful and memorable, but I would often say to myself, I don't know anyone like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that coming from? What reality is anchoring that portrayal? And that's problematic to me. I think that for me, it's always about showcasing the complexity of black folks' humanity.
Okay. So just related to that, part of what I do in my role as executive director of the center is to bring together programs around Black writers.
Yes.
And also, of course, the National Black Writers Conference.
Right.
But there are some who would say, well, why do you need to have a conference? I mean, it was really, for me, it was problematic going into Barnes and Nobles and wanting to look at the range of books written by African American writers, particularly in fiction, and finding out, well, if you don't know their name, you're not going to find it because we no longer have that section.
Right.
So do we need a Black Writers Conference? Do we still need to have our bookstores specializing, having sections where writers are in a special section, but also interspersed throughout? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I feel that you have to have a Black Writers Conference. You have to have, as I do, a Black Writers Reading Series. You have to have, hopefully, we can continue to have Black bookstores. And I'm very torn about sections in larger bookstores or mainstream bookstores that focus on Black writers because I don't like the lumping of everything together. And that's a controversial position, I know. There are people who feel that it's all valid, equally so. And I feel it is, but not in the same way. Like, there's no question that James Brown is amazing for what he did. The Funk Master is right, Godfather of Soul. And he's not John Coltrane.
That's right.
And there's no need to compare them. They're just different, amazing Black artists. But the complexity of what Coltrane created, of course, course, it's on a level different from what James Brown created. They're both masters in their genre. But I worry about the lumping of it all. And even though words like literary seem elite, and we don't have to use that, I do think we need to figure out a way to help people to understand the range of what Black writers can create. That's why our Black Writers Conference is so egalitarian, because it places everyone on a platform, and then people can come and they can see for themselves the range of the work. I think that's what I'm speaking to. And it's curated. That's important,
Yes.
right? So people have some guidance when they walk in.
Mm-hmm.
I
Well,
think that's
it's
vital.
interesting. I support that, but the people you just chose to name, James Brown and John Coltrane, of course, are known to the general public.
Right.
Bridgett Davis may not be known as well.
Right.
How do we ensure that people know about your work unless we do it in conferences or you're doing your own marketing? I mean, if someone goes in a book, how do we ensure that they know your work?
Right. Well, this is important.
Because we no longer have a situation where you have only a few writers who are at the marquee. There's so many more people writing.
There's so many. It's a glut, right? In
Yes.
a good way. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a tough question. I think what you do is so important. It's one of the pieces of amplifying Black writers' work. This radio show, your conference, the work you do at the center, that's really like a foot soldier on behalf of Black literature. And we just need more of that. We need more of that because there was a time when word of mouth worked. I think it still can.
Yeah. Well, word of mouth does work.
It works.
It works.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's part of it.
That's a big piece of it. I think that it's also important for us to take bigger advantage of social media.
Social media has really leveled.
Absolutely.
Helped to level.
It really has.
And I was reading an article recently about the artist, how the artist no longer just focus on his or her craft.
Absolutely
They
not.
have to be concerned about the marketing and the business end of it.
Yes, your sort of way that you present yourself to the world. I'm learning that.
Yes.
I'm learning that with the promotion of this book. And this is a good day because the National Book Critics Circle nomination, how do you say that? The National Book Critics Circle Award nominations. Yes. Claudia Rankine's nominated in 2 categories. They're honoring Toni Morrison with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Saeed Jones, a young poet who went to Rutgers to get his MFA, is being nominated for an award. And so Marlon James.
Yes.
So this is really wonderful.
Yes,
it's a good moment. And a couple of them, at least, I would say to you, really became known vis-a-vis social media. They really understood that platform and that ability to get the word out and find their allies that way. Maybe that's our future.
Yeah, I think you're definitely hitting something there. So as we come to close, I'd like to know, what is the message that you have for writers? You're running writing programs. Right. You're faced with this all the time. What message do you have? And who are some of the writers who've really influenced you as a writer?
I would say with the writers who've influenced me, it's been quite a range. I often tell people that the first writer who's meant the most to me in life has been Louise Merriweather.
Okay.
For her seminal novel, Daddy Was a Number Runner. I had never known before I read her book as a girl that Black girls could be protagonists in stories.
That's right. Where do you see that?
It was unbelievably
and stories
moving.
Written by women.
Exactly. That put a girl at the center of the story. And that really, I believe, set me on a course to become a writer. So I love to point out to everyone that book changed my life.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a big book for me. And what I would say to aspiring writers is that the important thing is to just put words on paper, first of all, and not be intimidated by what they will sound like. The rhythm of writing, the regularity of it, the decision to give yourself the space to do it is vital before you can create anything of value. And secondly, I would say find allies.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
I mean, find a writing group amongst like-minded people. It could be 2 or 3 people. It doesn't have to be big. Folks who are equally committed to writing and understand what you're doing, and they get you. I think that's key. And then wherever else you can find allies, find them.
Okay. So you have popularized Into the GoSlow. Why the title of that?
Yes, the title, very quickly,
Yes.
it is based on an expression that Nigerians use a lot. They're very clever with language.
Yes, they are.
And
Storytellers.
and this is part of their patois. They call traffic jams go slow. So they'll say, leave an hour early because the go slow is crazy-o. And so you understand that, yeah, traffic jams are about cars going slow. It makes beautiful sense. And it just seemed like the perfect metaphor for me because Angie, the young woman in the story, is really in her own kind of traffic, sort of stuck, like a traffic jam of the heart, right? And she needs to be able to move forward and sort of carry on with her life. So I just thought, what a perfect metaphor for the story.
Okay. So I want to thank you. Thank you for writing this book and
Thank you.
and touching the lives of so many people and raising so many issues in the book.
Well, thank you. I
Into the
really
Go
appreciate
Slow.
this opportunity.
And,
It's been great.
And you've given us a lot of motivation. So I
Oh.
want to encourage the listening audience to go out and purchase Into the Go Slow by Bridgett M Davis. It's a wonderful book, and you can get it on.
You can get it at all the major online sites. You can get it from IndieBound, which allows you to buy it from an independent bookstore. But it's also available on Amazon and some of the other places.
And also order it from your bookstore.
And
Make
you
sure.
can always go into your bookstore
Yes.
and order it. I encourage that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so thank you. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you.
And coming to Writers on Writing. This has been Brenda Greene, Executive Director of the Center for Black Literature at Medgar Evers College and Director of the National Black Writers Conference and also Chair of the English Department here at Medgar Evers College. I want to thank my engineer, Fritz Richardson, for always being there. And remember, the writer's always reading, the reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing. Empower yourselves as readers and writers. Write me at writers@mec.cuny.edu and come back next week.
I'm sure most of you have heard of Langston Hughes. And he wrote a poem about rivers. And we call this song, I've Known Rivers.